Michael and Grace had been married for 8 years. From the outside, people thought they were the perfect couple. They lived in a beautiful 3-bedroom house with white walls, polished floors, and a small garden where Grace grew roses. Michael had a good job at a construction company, and Grace worked as an accountant in a small firm. They often attended family gatherings together, smiling for pictures and holding hands just long enough for people to believe the love was still there. But behind those smiles, there was a silence that no one could see. Their marriage was not built on laughter anymore. It was built on habits, routines, and unspoken disappointment. Grace was the kind of woman who gave her all to the people she loved. She cooked his favorite meals, ironed his shirts before work, and made sure the bills were paid on time. She never complained when he forgot her birthday or came home too tired to talk. She told herself that marriage was about patience and sacrifice. But lately, she had begun to feel invisible in her own home. Michael barely looked at her during dinner, his eyes fixed on his phone. The man who once told her she was his world now treated her like she was part of the furniture. Grace felt like she was disappearing, piece by piece. Michael, on the other hand, believed he was still a good husband. He provided for the home, paid the mortgage, and bought groceries when he remembered. In his mind, that was enough. He didn't see the loneliness growing in Grace's heart. He didn't notice how quiet she had become, or how her laughter had faded over the years. Instead, he believed that she would always be there, waiting for him no matter what. Little did he know, the foundation of their marriage was cracking, and soon, everything would change in a way he could never imagine. Grace often woke up before the sun, slipping quietly out of bed so she wouldn't disturb Michael. She would make coffee, pack his lunch, and lay out his work clothes, all while he slept peacefully. She did these things not because he asked, but because she loved him, or at least the memory of the man she fell in love with. Yet every day, the warmth she once felt for him was fading. She noticed the way he left in the mornings without saying goodbye, sometimes not even touching the food she prepared. Grace wondered if he even realized how much effort she put into keeping their home running smoothly. At work, Grace hid her sadness behind polite smiles and neat spreadsheets. Her colleagues thought she was simply quiet by nature, but in truth, she was exhausted. It wasn't the kind of tiredness that a night's sleep could fix. It was a heaviness in her heart, a feeling that she was giving everything and receiving nothing in return. She couldn't remember the last time Michael had asked how her day went, or the last time they had sat together and truly talked. Even when they were in the same room, it felt like they lived in two separate worlds. Michael seemed to have his mind elsewhere all the time. He came home later than before, claiming there was extra work at the office. Grace wanted to believe him, but deep inside, a small voice whispered that something wasn't right. Every night, Grace lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if love was supposed to hurt this quietly. She didn't know it yet, but the answers to her questions would come sooner than she thought, and they would shatter the life she knew. Michael's change was slow at first, almost unnoticeable. He started staying at work longer, saying there were deadlines to meet. Grace believed him at first, thinking he was simply working hard to provide for them. But then came the missed dinners, the unanswered calls, and the faint smell of perfume on his shirts, a scent Grace didn't wear. When she asked about it, he laughed it off, saying it was from a colleague's birthday celebration at the office. His smile didn't reach his eyes, and for the first time, Grace felt an ache of suspicion deep in her chest. She tried to ignore the warning signs. She told herself that marriages went through difficult seasons, and that maybe they just needed some time to reconnect. She suggested weekend outings, but Michael always had an excuse, a work trip, a headache, or just not in the mood. Even on the rare nights he came home early, he would spend hours on his phone, typing messages with a smirk she hadn't seen in years. Grace wanted to ask who he was texting, but her pride stopped her. She didn't want to seem needy, though inside, she was crumbling. The warmth in Michael's voice when he spoke to her had disappeared. In its place was impatience, as though every word she said was a bother to him. He began comparing her to other women, in small, cutting ways that stayed with her long after the conversation ended. Grace could feel him slipping away, but she didn't know how to hold on. The man she married, the man who once promised to fight for their love, was already halfway out the door. And before long, he would stop pretending altogether. It was a Thursday evening when Michael finally said the words that would change everything. Grace was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of vegetable soup, when he walked in without greeting her. His face was unreadable, but his voice was cold. "Grace, we need to talk," he said, pulling out a chair and sitting down. She wiped her hands on a towel and faced him, heart beating faster than she wanted to admit. "I don't think this marriage is working anymore," he continued. "I want a divorce." The spoon in Grace's hand almost slipped, but she held herself steady, forcing her face to remain calm. She had imagined this moment in her nightmares, but she never thought it would feel this empty. There were no shouting matches, no tears, just his flat tone and the faint hum of the refrigerator. Grace looked at him, searching for a trace of the man she once knew, but all she saw was someone who had already moved on. She wanted to ask if there was another woman, but she knew the answer wouldn't matter. Instead, she took a deep breath and asked, "Are you sure this is what you want?" Michael didn't hesitate. "Yes. I've already spoken to a lawyer." Grace nodded slowly, her mind racing. She didn't beg him to stay. She didn't list all the sacrifices she had made over the years. She simply said, "All right." The calmness in her voice seemed to throw him off, but he recovered quickly. As he left the kitchen, Grace stood there, staring at the pot of soup. She had cooked it for both of them, but now, it felt like a meal for one. That night, as she lay in bed alone, she made a quiet promise to herself. If he wanted freedom, she would give it to him, but not in the way he expected. The days after Michael's confession passed in strange silence. Grace went about her routines as if nothing had happened. She still packed his lunch, still ironed his shirts, and still greeted him when he came home. But inside, something had shifted. She no longer did these things out of love, she did them out of discipline, a way to keep her mind steady while she planned her next steps. Michael seemed almost relieved by her calmness. He mistook it for weakness. Grace began paying closer attention to their finances. She knew every account they had together, every bill, every investment. But there were things Michael didn't know. For years, she had been running a small side business from home, managing it quietly and funneling the profits into a separate account. She had never told Michael because she wanted something that was truly hers. Now, that hidden account felt like a shield. While Michael was busy dreaming about his life without her, Grace was making sure she would walk away from the marriage on her own terms. At night, she would sit by the window after he fell asleep. She wasn't afraid of being alone. She was afraid of losing herself. She knew the divorce would be messy, but she had no intention of letting Michael see her break. If he thought she would cry and beg him to stay, he was in for a surprise. Grace decided she would meet him in court with dignity, not desperation. And when the time came, she would make sure he learned one lesson: never underestimate the quiet ones. Grace's mornings began earlier than ever, but now her routines had a new purpose. She started using the extra time before work to organize important documents, her business registration papers, tax records, and receipts from the past 5 years. She stored them in a folder and hid it at the back of her wardrobe. She also visited the bank quietly during her lunch breaks, meeting with her personal banker to review her savings and investments. Michael thought she was simply working late. She also began seeking advice from a friend she trusted, a lawyer named Teo, who had once been her classmate in university. Teo listened carefully as Grace explained her situation, asking questions about assets, property, and income. "You need to protect what's yours before you walk into that courtroom," Teo said firmly. Grace agreed. She wasn't trying to ruin Michael, she was simply making sure she wouldn't leave empty-handed. The more they spoke, the more Grace realized she was stronger than she thought. She didn't have to be the victim in this story. At home, Grace became quieter, observing Michael's habits without reacting. She noticed how often he smiled at his phone, how quickly he closed his laptop when she walked into the room. She no longer asked questions. She no longer needed answers. Her focus was no longer on saving the marriage, it was on saving herself. For the first time in months, she began to feel a strange sense of power. She had a plan, and that plan gave her courage. Michael had no idea that the woman who cooked his dinner and washed his clothes was the same woman who would one day walk into court and turn his world upside down. The rumors reached Grace on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. She was leaving work when a former neighbor stopped her by the gate. The older woman hesitated before speaking, glancing around as if afraid of being overheard. "My dear, I don't know if it's my place to say this," she began softly, "but I've seen Michael, with another woman." Grace forced a polite smile, nodding for her to continue. Mrs. Oladipo described a young lady with long braids and bright red lipstick, someone she had seen with Michael more than once in the city. Grace listened quietly, her heart steady. It wasn't news, it was confirmation. That evening, she went about her routine as usual. She prepared dinner, served Michael when he returned home, and asked nothing. But as they ate, she noticed the faint traces of perfume again, a fragrance much sweeter and stronger than anything she owned. Michael chatted casually about his long day at work, never realizing that his wife already knew where he had been. Grace didn't confront him, she didn't need to. She knew that soon enough, the truth would no longer be whispered in corners, it would stand in the open, where even Michael couldn't hide it. In the following days, Grace began hearing the same story from different people. A colleague mentioned spotting Michael at a restaurant in town, sitting too close to a woman who wasn't his wife. Another neighbor saw them entering a hotel together. Each story chipped away at whatever remained of the man she once loved, replacing it with a stranger she could barely recognize. She understood now, the man who wanted to leave her was already gone. And when the day came, she would let him go, but not without leaving him with a memory he would never forget. Michael didn't come home until nearly midnight. Grace was sitting at the dining table, going through a pile of papers, when she heard his car pull into the driveway. He walked in smelling of alcohol and laughter, his shirt slightly untucked. "You're still awake?" he asked casually. Grace only nodded, keeping her eyes on her documents. She didn't ask where he had been, she already knew. But the way he carried himself that night told her everything she needed to know. He believed he had already won. Earlier that evening, Michael had been with his friends at a popular bar in the city. Over drinks, he told them the divorce was just a formality. "By this time tomorrow, I'll be a free man," he boasted. His friends laughed, clapping him on the back, and one even joked that he could finally introduce the other woman without shame. Michael grinned, feeling powerful, certain that Grace was too weak to make the process difficult. He bragged that she was soft and too polite to fight for anything. His arrogance was fueled by the belief that she had nothing of her own. No money, no leverage, no plan. When he finally stumbled into bed, Michael fell asleep within minutes, leaving his phone on the nightstand. Grace didn't touch it. She didn't need to. Everything she needed to know was already clear in her mind. She glanced at him one last time, not with love or longing, but with a quiet sense of finality. By this time tomorrow, he would be looking at her with different eyes. He thought the courtroom would be the end of their story, but for Grace, it was only the beginning of a new chapter, one where she finally stood on her own without his shadow. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Michael had left early in the morning for another meeting and hadn't returned yet. Grace sat on the edge of the bed they had shared for 8 years, running her fingers over the neatly folded court papers beside her. She had already packed a small suitcase with her essentials, not because she planned to leave tonight, but because she knew tomorrow would change everything. The walls around her held years of memories, wedding photos, holiday trips, yet, looking at them now, she felt no warmth. Only a strange calm, as if she had already stepped out of this life in her heart. She walked through each room slowly, letting her eyes linger on the things they had built together. The living room sofa where they had once cuddled during rainy evenings. The kitchen where she had cooked countless meals he never truly appreciated. The small garden outside, where they had planted roses in their first year of marriage. Each memory felt like a closed book, stories she no longer wanted to reread. Grace realized that she wasn't losing a home tomorrow. She was shedding a shell that no longer fit. And with every step she took, the weight on her shoulders grew lighter. That night, she made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the moonlight spill across the garden. She thought about the woman she had been, the one who believed that love meant giving until you had nothing left. She promised herself she would never be that woman again. Tomorrow, in court, she would walk in with dignity, speak only when necessary, and let the truth speak for itself. Michael thought she would come broken, but she knew better. She wasn't going there to beg. She was going there to show him that she was far more than the wife he thought he could discard. The next morning, the courtroom buzzed with quiet chatter as people waited for their cases to be called. Grace walked in wearing a simple but elegant navy blue dress, her hair neatly pulled back. She carried herself with a calm confidence that turned a few heads. Michael was already there, standing near his lawyer. When he saw Grace, his smirk widened. Grace met his gaze for a brief moment, then looked away, focusing instead on the judge's bench at the front of the room. They sat across from each other, papers neatly stacked before them. Grace's lawyer, Teo, gave her a reassuring nod. Michael's lawyer, a tall man with a sharp suit, kept flipping through documents, clearly prepared to make this as quick as possible. Michael leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen on the table. The room smelled faintly of old wood and ink, the air heavy with the tension of lives about to change. Grace's hands rested lightly on her lap, her heart steady. She knew what was coming, and she was ready. The judge entered, and everyone stood. The sound of shuffling feet and chairs echoed through the room. "Be seated," the judge said, scanning the room before glancing down at the case file. Michael and Grace Adeyemi, petition for divorce. His voice was firm, his eyes unreadable. Grace felt Michael's gaze on her again, but she didn't turn to meet it. She kept her eyes forward, determined to face this moment without giving him the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. The game he thought he was winning was about to change. Michael leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing at the corners of his lips. To him, the court session was just a formality, a quick signature, a few words, and he would walk out a free man. When the judge asked if he was ready to proceed, he answered confidently, "Yes, Your Honor." He picked up the pen with a flourish and signed the divorce papers as though he was signing an autograph. His friends, sitting quietly at the back, exchanged knowing looks. Michael was certain Grace had no fight in her. In his mind, she was still the soft, accommodating woman who wouldn't dare challenge him. He glanced at her as he pushed the papers toward the clerk, expecting to see sadness or regret. But Grace's face remained calm, almost unreadable. That unsettled him for a moment, but he quickly brushed it off. He told himself she was probably just trying to hold her composure. He leaned slightly toward his lawyer and whispered, "This should be done in no time." The lawyer nodded, clearly confident as well. Michael's arrogance filled the air like a strong perfume, thick and impossible to ignore. The judge looked at Grace. "Mrs. Adeyemi, it's your turn." Michael turned to watch her, waiting for a small show of emotion, perhaps a trembling hand or a tear. But Grace didn't give him the satisfaction. She sat straighter, took the pen, and signed her name without hesitation. Her hand was steady, her eyes cold. In that moment, Michael felt a tiny crack in his confidence, though he couldn't quite explain why. Grace slid the signed papers back toward the judge, her expression still calm. She wasn't here to create a scene, she was here to close a chapter. Her lawyer, Teo, gave her a brief nod of approval, sensing the quiet strength radiating from her. Michael kept stealing glances at her, trying to read her thoughts, but she offered him nothing. Every time their eyes met, she looked through him as though he were already a stranger. The judge began reviewing the details of the settlement. Michael's lawyer sat forward, confident they would walk away with the division they had requested. Grace remained silent as the judge read through the list: property, vehicles, and joint accounts. Then, the judge paused, frowning slightly. "Before we proceed," he said, "we must address the matter of undisclosed assets." Michael's head tilted, his smirk fading just slightly. His lawyer shifted in his seat, unsure of what was coming next. Grace kept her eyes on the judge, saying nothing. This was the moment she and Teo had been waiting for. Michael had no idea that the woman sitting across from him had built an entirely separate financial world he knew nothing about. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked down at the file in front of him. According to documentation provided by Mrs. Adeyemi's counsel, there is an account in her name containing a balance of... He paused to double-check the figure. Michael leaned forward, curiosity beginning to push through his arrogance. The judge's voice was steady as he read out the number. Michael's eyes widened instantly. The amount was far beyond anything he had imagined, millions sitting quietly in Grace's personal bank account. He turned sharply toward her, but she didn't look at him. Instead, she sat calmly, hands folded neatly on the table. Whispers rippled through the small courtroom as the figure sank in. "This account," the judge continued, "was legally acquired through Mrs. Adeyemi's private business ventures, which she has run independently for the past several years. As it stands, These funds are not part of the marital assets and remain solely in her possession. The words hit Michael like a punch to the chest. The woman he had dismissed as dependent and helpless had been building an empire right under his nose. Grace finally looked at Michael, her gaze steady and unflinching. "I wasn't sitting at home waiting for you to take care of me, Michael," she said quietly, her voice carrying just enough for him to hear. "While you were busy elsewhere, I was busy building something of my own." She didn't raise her voice, but every word cut deep. The judge cleared his throat. Given this revelation, the division of property remains as earlier stated, but it is important to note that Mrs. Adeyemi's private funds are beyond contestation. Michael tried to speak, but his lawyer quickly placed a hand on his arm, silently warning him to keep quiet. Grace's composure was a stark contrast to his growing frustration. For the first time since the morning began, Michael realized he was not in control. This wasn't the easy victory he had imagined. Grace wasn't the broken woman he expected to face. The rest of the proceedings passed in a blur for Michael. His mind kept replaying the figure the judge had read aloud. He remembered all the times he had belittled Grace. He remembered mocking her for working extra hours at her accounting job, thinking it was just pocket change. Now he understood. She had been working for herself, not for him. Grace didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Her silence was more powerful than any insult she could have thrown at him. The judge finalized the divorce, signing the decree and declaring their marriage officially dissolved. Michael felt an unexpected hollowness in his chest. He had walked into the courtroom thinking he would feel free, but instead, he felt smaller. When they stood to leave, Michael reached out instinctively, as if to stop her. But Grace simply stepped past him without a glance. The roles had shifted. She was the one walking away now, and there was nothing he could do to pull her back. Outside the courtroom, a few reporters who covered local cases approached Grace for comments. She politely declined, choosing instead to walk quietly to her car. In the back seat, her mind drifted to the years she had spent building her business. It had started with small bookkeeping jobs for local traders, then expanded into managing accounts for larger businesses. Every extra payment she earned went into her private account, untouched by household expenses. She remembered late nights at the dining table, working while Michael was out, the sound of her calculator clicking in the silence. It wasn't just about the money. It was about creating a safety net in case life ever demanded she stand alone. She had never imagined the day would come so soon, but she was glad she had prepared. As she drove away, she felt no bitterness. What Michael had done had hurt her, yes, but it had also freed her. She had something he couldn't take away, her independence, her self-respect, and her future. Michael stood outside the courthouse, watching her car disappear into the distance. His friends tried to speak to him, but their words felt far away. Regret sat heavy in his chest. He had laughed while signing the divorce papers. Now he realized she was walking away with everything that truly mattered, and she had never needed him as much as he thought. He replayed moments in his head, the time she had asked for his attention, the nights she had cooked his favorite meals, the quiet way she had supported him even when he didn't deserve it. He realized too late that he had traded something priceless for a fleeting thrill. The woman he had underestimated was now beyond his reach. That night, he sat alone in the house that suddenly felt too big, too empty. For the first time, he wondered if freedom was really what he had been chasing, or if he had simply run away from the one person who had truly cared for him. Grace didn't answer when Michael called her later that week. She saw his name flash on her phone screen, but she let it ring. She wasn't interested in hearing his apologies or explanations. Some doors, once closed, should stay that way. She had no anger left, only peace. She focused on moving into her new apartment, a smaller but brighter space that felt entirely hers. She decorated it with fresh flowers, books, and photographs that made her smile. There were no ghosts of the past here, no silent dinners or cold conversations. Every corner of the place felt like a fresh start. Michael sent a few messages, each one shorter than the last, until they stopped altogether. Grace didn't hate him. She had simply outgrown the version of herself that had tolerated his neglect. Grace poured her energy into her business, expanding it beyond what she had ever imagined. She hired a small team, opened an office, and began mentoring younger women in finance. She found joy in helping others secure their own independence, She also began traveling, short trips at first, then longer ones. She explored places she had once only seen in magazines, collecting memories that were hers alone. Each trip reminded her that life was bigger than the walls she had once felt trapped within. In time, she met new people, built new friendships, and discovered parts of herself she had long forgotten. Her laughter returned, lighter and freer than it had been in years. One sunny afternoon, Grace sat in her office by the window, sipping tea as she reviewed her company's growth report. The numbers were strong, but what made her smile wasn't the profit, it was the knowledge that she had built it all herself. No one could take that from her. She thought briefly of Michael, wondering if he ever truly understood the depth of what he had lost. But the thought passed quickly, replaced by a quiet gratitude for the lessons she had learned. Sometimes, the end of one story was simply the beginning of another, and hers was just getting started. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Grace closed her laptop and stepped outside. The air felt warm against her skin, the world open and wide before her. She walked down the street with her head high, carrying nothing from the past but the strength it had given her. Freedom, she realized, didn't just taste sweet, it tasted like herself.